Okay, guys, so we're on page 1 of Revenge still, and we've just talked about this chiasmus here, which was intended by Tacitus to draw attention to Piso's actions towards Germanicus. So, as I kind of mentioned in our Skype, it's not necessarily the case that this is what Tiberius would want to focus on, but it's definitely what Tacitus is going to want to focus on, because this whole chapter is about Germanicus's death and how upset people were and how guilty Piso seemed. So that's why we had that chiasmus there. The next thing we're going to talk about is this word juvenem here, okay, which means young man. Now, Tacitus could use any noun here that would mean man. He could even just say Germanicum. He could use whatever he wants really to represent Germanicus, and yet he's gone for the noun which means young man. So what he's doing here is highlighting Germanicus's innocence. Remember early on we talked about how Germanicus is compared to Alexander the Great because they both died young. They both died in their 30s. So Tacitus is drawing our attention to how young Germanicus was when all this was happening to him because of Piso. In addition to that, you have sibilance in this sentence, which highlights Tacitus's disgust at Piso's behaviour. So you have S's running all the way through here. Okay. S's in English and in Latin are a kind of harsh sound, just like P's and C's. You can kind of spit them out. So it isn't alliteration, remember, it's sibilance because it's S. And it shows Tacitus's disgust at Piso's behaviour. And along with these things, we also have the kind of gradual separation of Tiberius from Piso. It's what makes this speech so complicated because on the one hand, you've got Tiberius trying to defend Piso because Piso was his friend. You've then also got Tiberius trying to gradually separate himself from Piso so that he doesn't get accused of anything. And throughout the whole speech, you've also got the fact that it isn't Tiberius who necessarily wrote or said this. This is what Tacitus thinks Tiberius would have said in the situation. So everything you comment on here could be something that Tiberius is doing, and it can also be something that Tacitus is doing. So the S's here and the word juvenem and that chiasmus from before are all negative representations, are all things that focus on the bad behaviour of Piso and our disgust at Piso. So therefore, it's more likely that it's Tacitus doing that than this is kind of based on any reality of what Tiberius said. At the end of this sentence, we then have the verb extinxerit, which is where we get the word extinct from, extinguish, so to put out. Here it's the idea that Piso put out Germanicus's life, so it's that he killed him through a crime. Tacitus has left this verb till the end because he wants to emphatically position it, and he wants it to be the last thing that sticks in our minds when we read this. So remember, Tacitus is all about the fact that Piso killed Germanicus, so he leaves that verb till the very end. Another thing that happens in this speech, which is probably more likely supposed to be how Tiberius would have said it rather than how Tacitus wants it to seem, is the thing that I've mentioned before, which is the length of these phrases. Okay, so if we get rid of all this stuff here, and we can focus on the length of these two phrases. So if you have a look, we've got, it starts up here, so whether Piso did this, or, and then the new phrase starts here, whether he did this. So it's whether he angered him and was happy at his death, or if he killed him. Now, this isn't Tacitus trying to make a point about his own opinion. this is how Tacitus might believe that Tiberius said things. Because as I've said before, he mentions the fact that Piso might have killed Germanicus himself here, almost as a little side note. Okay, so it's a very brief phrase. Because Tiberius does not want to focus on the most serious crime. He wants to focus and spend time on this bit, which is, oh, maybe he annoyed him, maybe he was happy when he died, or maybe he killed him. As just kind of like a little afterthought. He doesn't really want to make a big deal out of it. He's actually said earlier on, you've got to think with unbiased minds, and yet, when he describes the crimes, the biggest one from Tacitus's point of view, is this murder of Germanicus, and yet Tiberius only mentions it very briefly. And it's because he doesn't want to focus on the more serious crime. He wants to focus on the less serious crime, because that would stop him being involved. And then the final thing that he says, Tacitus has left to the end, because this is the worst crime of all. This one is one where you immediately get convicted. It's a criminal offence, and it's probably the worst thing that you can do as a Roman, and that is encouraging people to rebel against Rome. So the question is, at first, did he go over and annoy Germanicus just because he doesn't like him and perhaps kill him? Or did he go over and annoy Germanicus because he actually wanted to encourage the legions to rebel against the whole of Rome? Was he that reckless that actually this was just a kind of personal aim, and he was doing this to gain some kind of power, some kind of control himself? The word seditionem here is the biggest one. We've translated it as rebellion. It's also where you get the word sedition from. So it's a very serious crime. It's like a treason, basically. And the biggest deal for this for a Roman reader is that it would remind them of how Germanicus went over to Germany and quelled a rebellion. So there was a rebellion going on in Germany, and Germanicus, who wasn't called Germanicus back then, went over and sorted it out, and that's how he gained his name. So by saying this, not only does it suggest some really seriously terrible behaviour from Piso, it also reminds us, in contrast, of the fabulous behaviour of Germanicus. So that's our first point here. So reminds Roman reader of Germanicus quelling a rebellion in Germany. Okay. The other thing is, Tacitus has obviously left this phrase till the end because it's the most serious crime of all three of them. But also, and here's the kind of big punch at the end from Tiberius's speech, this is what Tiberius is going to want the Senate to focus on, because this is a suggestion that Piso was doing these things for his own personal gain and not because of something that Tiberius told him. So Tiberius here is saying, maybe Piso did all this because he wanted to cause a rebellion against our Roman Empire. So he is separating, really seriously distancing himself from Piso by suggesting that this wasn't done under his orders, but this was a rebellious thing to do. Okay, so it's not easy, this speech. It's only a short speech. But it is quite complicated, and there is this balance between what Tiberius wants to kind of enforce upon the reader and the listener, and also what Tacitus, writing later, making this speech up, kind of wants to put across to us. So there are different types of points to make all the way through. Make sure you've got all these notes written down, and obviously if there's anything that you don't understand, you can ask me about it in our next lesson.